Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great, as I always say. Welcome and welcome back to the channel. In this video, I have even more wild and crazy, or whatever word you want to use, encounters with things you just don't really know 100% what they are. So, if that sounds like your cup of tea, definitely pull up a stump with me, and let's jump into it. Also, this is your reminder to drink water. And now, let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. I became a big, strong army man, just like my dad always wanted. And during the time I'm talking about, I was stationed in Germany, basically doing nothing. Sitting with my thumb up my butt, essentially. The deployment was starting to wrap up, and it was time for leave. Some of the other squaddies go out for hookers and drinks and that kind of dumb stuff. I don't really care for any of that. I decide that I want to go for a run in a nearby park. It's getting dark, but I don't really care. I'm not afraid of the dark. It doesn't matter to me. So as I'm running, I see a dude in a black jacket and black pants walking slowly up ahead. I move to pass, and the dude doesn't respond when I say, "On your left," so I repeat it in German. No response. I look over my shoulder. The dude is looking down at the ground, still walking slow. I try to catch his eyes. It's then that I realize that he doesn't have any. He looks up and smiles at me. I start booking it down the trail. I'm sprinting. I look back. He's somehow keeping pace with me, but it looks like that he's just still walking. I think, oh crap. Now, I'm in a full-on sprint, high on adrenaline and everything. I'm scared. I round the bend. He's now in front of me. I stop on a dime and try to turn back. He's back behind me again. I turn around and jump into the nearby bushes to cut across the path. I probably looked like a dumbass, but after a few minutes of sitting there as quietly as I could, my lungs hurting and terrified, I see the dude standing on the path where I jumped off, still not moving, just staring at the ground. He turns around, looks directly in my direction, even though he shouldn't be able to see me. I blink. He's gone. It was the worst experience of my life. I have absolutely zero clue as to what it was or who he was. I live in South America, and during this time, I was walking down a road into a town so I can actually enjoy some internet. I passed by a shrine. Out of habit, I stopped to pay respects and stuff, say thanks for providing a good harvest to my gramps. Another guy walks by and pretty much scorns me. He even goes so far as to spit on the shrine of the Alux. I freak out. I clean it off. I get called, in our language, the definition of a superstitious idiot. I shake my head some, and I keep walking on my way. The entire time I'm walking, there's now movement in the tree line. Legitimate movement in the foliage, like there's something kinda running through the leaves. The guy who spit on the shrine is still far ahead. He assumes it's some kind of wild dog. He starts cussing and yelling at a bush and kicking rocks in hopes of scaring whatever it is away. The rock that he kicked into the bushes is chucked back at him at full force. Then we hear giggling and some garbled speech. The guy flips out and runs into the brush with a machete raised. We hear a scream. I think, oh crap, something happened. I run after the dude. The dude tripped on a very huge root that seemed to come out of nowhere. The dude landed in a huge pile of cow poop. It's mainly smeared on his mouth. There's what sounds like hissing nearby. I nope out and run because jungle snakes don't screw around. As I'm running away, I hear what sounds like lots of movements, multiple little feet running through the tree line, and high-pitched shouting. There's lots of noise that remind me of war cries almost. I saw the dude again a few days later, cleaning the shrine and paying hard respects to it. Way back in 2011, I was living in Arizona, the Sierra Vista to be exact. It had an incredibly bad dry season that year, and our mountains caught fire. My house had to be evacuated due to the speed at which it was moving and the fact that we lived right up against the mountains. I decided to volunteer as a rescue worker that would go into those no-go areas to try and pull people and livestock out when possible. What ends up really happening is that by the time we get to these high-risk areas, the houses were burnt down and the livestock were unfortunately burnt alive. Because of this, a lot of animals would be attracted after the fires passed, so I carried a Ruger GP100 with me, and we kept a Winchester 98 in the car in case we came across a bear or a mountain lion that got a little aggressive. So this was nighttime on the third day of the fire. I was paired with the same older gentleman I usually worked with, and we got word to go up to this area called Ramsey Canyon to check in on a small farm that raised turkeys and had a bed and breakfast. I could remember going there as a kid and thinking that it was the most beautiful place God had ever bestowed upon us. So, flash to reality. Though it was pitch black and you couldn't see anything, the embers and patches of fire illuminated the area eerily. My partner stays in the truck since he's older, and I didn't want him to have to walk much in case he got caught somewhere. But I get out with my flashlight and walk around. The smell of burnt flesh and wood fills the air, and I can see what were once turkeys turned into piles of black organic matter, left barely recognizable. I can tell nothing is left, and I jump into the back of the truck, slapping the cab so he knows that I'm ready to move up and check the bed and breakfast portion. He stays in the truck once again, listening and communicating to the radio. I walk up to the bed and breakfast, noticing that it wasn't too heavily damaged. We weren't told if anyone was staying inside during the time or not. The fire moved so quickly that it would have been difficult to wake up and get out on time. As I'm leaned against the wall, I hear this scratching noise coming from inside the building. I run back to the truck and I tell my partner, who asks jokingly if I needed someone to hold my hand. I walk back alone, thinking that I'm being stupid, and I just open the door to the old bed and breakfast. I step over what feels like a bunch of bunched up cloth and empty bottles. Inside, I call to the place to inform that I am a volunteer rescue worker and that I'm here to help. There's no response. I call it once more, toying with my headlamp so I can better see what I'm looking at in the darkly lit area. As my lamp illuminates me, I can see all around me. I've been stepping on dead bird carcasses. Hundreds of birds littered the floor, blood and ash covering them. As I sit there quietly, I hear more scratching coming from the upstairs rooms. Terrified, I unholster my revolver thinking that it could be a coyote or some other animal taking refuge. I slowly walk up the stairs, taking notice of a mangled rabbit left ripped apart on the staircase. As I approach the top, I can see a door at the end of the hallway. There's something standing in it, and then suddenly, it slams shut. Now there's no wind here, no air current. I step out of the building with an uneasy feeling consuming me. I walk around the building and I get a look at the room. My goosebumps are on edge as I attempt to peer through the windows from the ground level. All I see is a dark figure, and then the curtains get yanked shut. I return to the truck and tell my partner. He tells me that I'm just spooked and I'm seeing things. But I know I wasn't just seeing things. We radio and tell them that it was clear and no one should go check this place again. To this day, I wonder what the hell was up there. I've seen some weird stuff in Arizona. I've got a place right on the edge of the desert down in the valley, and a nice concrete cabin right on the edge of the forest in Flagstaff. One thing both have in common are coyotes. There are tons of them that live right on the edges of civilization. They thrive there, scavenging and eating people's pets. And when I'm down in the valley, I like to go on walks during full moons. It's so bright outside that you can almost see perfectly, and the sun isn't beating down on you constantly. This was one such night, and I decided to go out for a walk. I followed the washout up to the canal, which has these 3 trails that, next to it, extend out into the desert. I decided to take the one that kind of meanders out away from the canal and into the wilderness proper. After a mile or so, the trail does a 90-degree turn when it meets an Indian reservation border. You're not supposed to go in there, but people do all the time. The views were spectacular. Nothing like seeing the red rock formations on the horizon with that pale moon glow to them. I wasn't liking the idea of taking my eyes off the scenery in order to navigate through the desert, so I stayed on the trail. I could hear a pack of coyotes pretty close by, doing their crazy, howling, yipping thing that they do whenever they tear a cat apart or something. I didn't really care. Coyotes are cowards, and they rarely, if never, attack humans. I kept walking, scanning the horizon for owls or something else interesting. I look over at the shoddy barbed wire fence that's a border to the reservation, and I see a pack of coyotes not 200 feet away. There are lots of fairly deep dips in the trail, so it makes sense that I didn't see them until now. I stop to watch them, and the moonlight illuminates things pretty clearly for me in a colorless way. I then notice that one of the coyotes seems way bigger than the others. More than that, it looks really screwed up and isn't moving properly. At first I think it could be a dead dog or something, and maybe that's what they're eating, which made sense, the way they were all milling around in a circle around it. I stared with morbid curiosity as the coyotes seemed to take turns looking back at me. Then the thing stands up, which scared the hell out of me, thinking it was dead, and even more because it stood on 2 its hind legs. It was over 5 feet tall. As it raised its arms into the air, it started more and more to look like a person, or at least that's what I could see. A person who was now wearing coyote pelts all over his body and was carrying some darkly colored dead animal in one of his hands that the coyotes kept leaping and trying to get as he raised it into the air. I had no idea what the hell to do at that point. I knew coyotes weren't really dangerous, but this guy was. Just the whole vibe was insanely dangerous. He was inside the reservation, so I could kind of guess what kind of thing was going on. I'd only been standing there a few seconds at this point when I realized that his coyotes were looking at something and then turned towards me. The moonlight wasn't enough to make out his face, and it was shadowed by pelts anyways. He stared at me for a second or two, as the coyotes walked in circles faster around him, looking up at him and then looking at me again. He turned away and he crouched down, and I swear he turned into a coyote and started sprinting and jumping, doing perfect coyote yipping noises, and bolted off into the desert, which the rest of them started doing and then followed. So I'm married, and my wife's sister is married too. Her and her husband have a 12-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl. The girl is playing in the backyard with her brother. The brother goes inside to get them drinks. The sister vanishes by the time he comes back outside. The family goes nuts. She's missing for 2 whole days. We all spend 2 sleepless days helping them search for her in the woods, in the fields, behind their house, anywhere you can think of. Suddenly, she shows up just outside the house. My wife happened to be there at the time. She frantically calls everyone to get them back at the house as soon as they can. Her family takes her to the ER. She's filthy, she stinks, she's a little weak, but otherwise okay. She doesn't remember where she was. After a couple of days, she's finally well enough to be brought home. Of course, her family clings to her the next week or so. Eventually, things go more or less back to normal. Some of us start to notice something is off with the little girl, though. She's very clingy to her mom. At the beginning, no one really pays attention, figuring that the girl is still upset after all that happened. After about 4 weeks of her being back, her mom collapses on her way to work. They take her to the ER. The doctors say that she is extremely fatigued. She says that everything was pretty normal. She slept a lot and ate right. She spent the night in the hospital and is released. She collapses again, this time at work. She spends more time in the hospital. The doctor says that there's something wrong and that she should take time off work. She agrees. Her and her husband decide to use their vacation time. They ask us if we can keep the kids for a couple of weeks while they're away. We say of course. Her mom is very reluctant to leave the girl. Not surprising given what happened, but she's kind of weird about it though. She is in tears as they're dropping them off with us. Just over the girl though, she doesn't seem to even recognize that the boy exists. In fact, she doesn't even say goodbye to him, and he goes upstairs and starts playing Xbox. A couple of days pass though, and the girl is a little strange. She doesn't want to play games with us or watch movies with her brother. She just kinda wants to always be around my wife. And she starts not really doing anything besides sitting by her. I write it off again, given everything that happened. Her mom is calling, sometimes 10 times a day. Sometimes she's screaming and crying to talk to her. My brother-in-law apologizes for her behavior and for her bothering us all hours of the night. After a couple more days, my brother-in-law calls again. He said that she's really sick and throwing up. He thinks she probably ate something bad and that they'll have to cut the trip short and come home as soon as she's feeling a bit better. He mentions that they haven't done anything anyways because she just stays in the hotel room crying to go home to their daughter. And then something weird happens. He calls the next day. He says that she magically feels better and that they're going to go ahead and stay until their original flight home. So it's late in the second week with the kids by this point. And now my wife is coming in from the garden. She staggers a little and falls to her knee. I make sure she's all right, and I asked if she wanted to go to the doctor or something. She said that she just felt a little lightheaded and was fine. I insist that she spend some time in bed, The little girl wants to sit in the bedroom with her. I explain that she isn't feeling well and needs some rest. The kid is super hateful about it, but I think, yeah, whatever, you're just a kid. I make the girl spend the night downstairs with us watching cartoons and stuff with her brother and I. My wife ends up sleeping for hours and hours. She spends the rest of the week not feeling so great. She's always a little dizzy. My brother and sister-in-law finally come home. They pick up their kids. I'm happy to see them go at this point. My wife cries. I think, hey, it's not like we can't go see them whenever we want, but she's being really weird about it. She spends most of the night crying. The next day comes, and my wife is going crazy. She wants to call off work and go to her sister's house. This is totally unlike her. Things get to the point where I have to physically restrain her to keep her from going over there. She's too weak to drive anyways. She's been feeling really crappy, and I remind her of this, and I say that she has to sleep. She has to relax and rest. But all evening and night, we bicker about it. The next day she wakes up. She wants to call work off again. I say, if you feel good enough to go over there, why don't you just go to work and then visit them on the way home? She agrees. We go to work. We work in the same building. She ends up getting sick and puking. We go home together. She's shaking and can't keep anything down. Her skin's all clammy. We go to the hospital, and they ask if my wife drinks heavily, and I say, no, she never drinks, ever. They drug test her, and there's nothing. The doctor tells us that he was performing these tests because she was showing symptoms of heavy withdrawal. And since the tests have all came back clean, they want to keep her overnight to see if anything changes. And she has a really rough night, but I stay with her just to hold her hand and stuff. She feels a lot better the next day. And now my wife's sister starts to get sick again. Collapses one evening after work. She hit her head on the edge of the kitchen table and has to spend several days in the hospital. The little boy wakes his dad up one night when she is in the hospital. He said that the little girl got out of bed and went downstairs. My brother-in-law freaks out and begins searching for her. She's laying in the yard, freezing. He immediately takes her to the ER. She spends a couple of days in the hospital with her mom and eats like a moose. She perks right up after a couple days. She says that she can't really remember the last month or so, but after that, she acts totally normal from then on. My sister-in-law stops getting sick, my wife stops getting sick, and is even normal again. She plays games with me and her brother when they're over. She's normal again. I have to think that I don't think it was their daughter that came back the first time. I wouldn't venture to guess what it was, but I think it did something to her mom and my wife while it was around them. It made them sick, weak, and created some sort of dependence on it. We do have such things in my culture, but they were usually considered like mythical. But the English word, or the closest thing to it, would be a changeling. So, what'd you think of those encounters? Let me know which one was your favorite one down in the comments. Do you have one of your own? I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you want to. And also in the description is a PayPal or a Patreon if that's something that interests you, if you want to donate to the channel that way. No pressure though. And before I go, I think I will tell one of my experiences that scared the living hell out of me at the time. So this happened in 2018. I was a little late on the whole getting your first car thing. I didn't get my first one until I was like 23, 24. So I got my first car around this time, and I spent that entire year driving all over the place pretty much. I would frequently be on dark back roads at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning sometimes. I don't do that anymore, obviously, but back then, I did. And in the springtime around here, it's very swampy in a lot of areas, so there's a lot of fog, and a lot of dense fog that kind of sits right on the road. So, usually around this time of year, March into April, May, you kind of want to be careful after it rains when you're coming back from the city because it can be really foggy and Lord knows what animals or people are out there, and that's what this is about. So, I was coming back from hanging out with friends. I don't remember exactly everything we did, but it was around April, May time of year, but it was 2018. And it's really foggy out, to the point where even if you have fog lights, you're not seeing anything. It's just a wall in front of you. So I'm obviously driving pretty slow because there's a lot of animals around this area. A lot of deer, moose, coyotes, God knows what. A lot of things that would be redacted, I guess. So I'm driving home. I'm around this area where, again, it's like real swampy. And it's real late into the night. Like, I think I said somewhere between 2 and 4 in the morning. So I'm driving along in this thick fog. I think I'm only driving 50 or 60. And usually this is a 100 zone. Or a 90. I don't remember off the top of my head. And it's been so long, people knock over the signs. Anyways, that's not important. I was driving slow. And I see a person up in front of me. They're not standing on any particular part of the road, but it's somewhere in the other lane. So I slow down and I roll down my window and I go, "Sir, are you okay? Do you need help?" And he has his back to me and he's staring off into the fog somewhere else. And I didn't really know what to do, so I just repeated myself. So once again I said, "Are you okay? Do you need me to call somebody?" And this is when this thing happened. I don't know what it was. It wasn't a shriek or anything like that. It was more like a mid-level yell or a growl, but it was loud. A loud noise, I'll say that. Kind of comes out of nowhere. And then the guy who has his back to me now disappears into the fog. And I can see a shadow of something really, really tall coming through the fog toward my vehicle. Now, obviously, I'm like, oh shit. So, whenever I get real scared, sometimes I'll say something off the cuff before I react. I don't know why I do that, I just do. So after this shriek happens and this guy just disappears into the fog, and I see this 9-foot tall shadowy thing walking up out of the ditch and coming toward me, on bipedal, mind you, I just said, "Well, that's not very nice," and I just took off down the road. And now as I tell it, you can probably think to yourself, oh, well, that could have been a really big moose or whatever, but where did the guy go? And I'm 100% sure it wasn't a moose. I would know because later that year, about 9 months later, I wrecked that car by hitting a moose. So I know what a moose looks like at night. But anyways, I don't know what it was. And even now, just telling it, I have the hair on my arm standing up because I just have no explanation. Never saw it before or after. Just really weird, I guess, redacted experiences on a lone highway at night. So yeah, that's my little drawn out story, I guess. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed my rambling at the end, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump. Thank you for watching.